Hi guys, welcome back to the workshop. I've got quite an exciting video for you today. It's a custom cutter block that I've had made from Whitehall Tools. It goes in the Festool HK85 and it produces a fake bead and butt boarding in any sort of sheet material. I'll have a bit more of an in-depth look at the actual cutter itself towards the end of the video, but if I just pull the guard back here, you can get an idea of what the concept is. It's a aluminium cutter with a profiled carbide tooth that fits in the VN HK kit you can get for the HK85 saw from Festool, and you use a guide rail to run the saw along, set a depth for the cutter, and it cuts that moulding shape in the piece of material alongside the guide rail. Okay, so I've marked on this board, so this is the back panel of the carcass. I've marked on it where I want my grooves to be. Now, because I've left one of my rails on site, I've got to move it to do the length of this cut. I've not got enough rails here to join together to do the whole thing in one pass, so it's a bit of a pain. So I'm going to have to just put a board and clamp it down, offset from the rail, do one cut to almost halfway, then move the rail along and carry on with the cut. But irrelevant of that, it's just a case of popping the rail down to the side of where I put my mark. So it's a 15mm cut, so it's a 15mm profile that I'm cutting into the board. So pop the rail to the side of that and set the depth, and then just cut along using the rail to keep it straight. So this is my board because I forgot the rails. It is worth mentioning that you want just a short piece either side of the board for the rail to run in on. So as you're introducing the saw to the cut, it's got a tendency for the rail to dip down, and it will just cut very slightly deeper on the leading edge on the way in and on the way out the edge of the board as the saw sort of follows the rail over the edge. So if you have just a thin sliver of timber, then that takes away that inaccuracy. It wants to be the same thickness as what you're cutting. Okay, so when you're introducing the saw onto the material, don't just push down on the saw with a load of pressure, because like I said before, you're going to get an inaccurate cut. You've got to keep the pressure on that bed perfectly flat with the material, else you're going to see it in the finished cut. So when you're leading it on, you've got to put all your pressure on the toe of the saw, and keep all the weight forward so that there's no pressure on the back of the machine to make it dip into the material. Almost lifting it up to keep it nice and light on the back and flat on the front. Then it's the opposite when you're coming off, so you're going to put all your weight on this part of the saw plate and just let the saw do the work as it cuts through the piece of wood. And there we have it. If you keep the weight nice and even on the saw, you should get a fairly flat and even cut. So you should be able to see on the plywood here, if it had dipped into the wood, it'd show up really badly because the glue lines would wobble along the curved cut. So that's the type of cut you're going to get. It's pretty clean. I mean, that's plywood. You're cutting the cross grain past that piece of ply. That is a cross grain cut, and it's nice and smooth. That's the type of profile that we've cut into the plywood. So once that's painted, it gives a bloody lovely finish, and you never really be able to tell that it's not proper boarding done really nicely. Okay, so as promised is a bit more of a in-depth look at the cutter and the kit that goes on the HK saw. So this is the VN HK85. There's a few bits of info and videos already on YouTube about this, but it's basically the standard cutter that you can buy that goes in the HK85 saw. So it's a two-part grooving cutter like you get on a spindle moulder. They slot together and they sit on this spindle shaft that replaces the shaft on the saw that the saw blade would normally sit on. So instead of that being a 2mm lip bore, what's it called? I forget the name of it now. Collet, there's a proper name for the centre of that. But instead of it being a 2mm thick, it's about 25mm thick or deep along that part there. And that allows for the extra thickness of the cutter. So this is a dead lightweight aluminium cutter, so there's no weight to this at all. And it's in two halves, so you can slot them over each other, like so. And you can adjust the width of the groove that you're making by sliding them apart, if you get the angle right, like so. There we go. It's slightly different to the Whitehill cutter in how it works, but yeah, so you get the picture there. You can slide them apart, put the appropriate spaces in between them, and that's what makes up your groove. So if you're doing a lot of trenching of door frame heads, say for a internal door lining, something like that want to be 25mm or 20mm, this is the perfect tool. You could set up your FSK rail on a 420mm FSK rail with the HK in this cutter, and you could be notching out the heads of your door linings in one pass. So yeah, pretty decent bit of kit for that type of application. So it gave me an idea to take this cutter and put a profile in it that would produce the moulding that I use a lot of in all my kitchen cabinets and that type of thing. So I took the basic dimensions of it and sent them off to Whitehill Tools with a very basic sketch that I did for them. I'll pop that up on screen if I can find it. And they sent me a sketch back as well. And we went back and forth a few times until I got the sort of design that I thought was right, and pulled the trigger and sent it off to be made. So I had about a 6 to 8 week wait for it to turn up, but you can see the drawing on the screen here now. It's an incredible drawing. I can't fault the drawing skills of the person that's done it. It's absolutely flawless. So yeah, kudos to whoever actually produced that drawing, but very clear of what you're getting, and what turned up is exactly as the drawing depicted. So yeah, I'm dead impressed with their service. So what actually turned up was this. So it's standard Whitehill packaging, and here's the cutter. So it looks identical to the schematic online. I bought myself a spare, what's that called? I've forgotten the name of it. I want to call it like a spigot, but it's not a spigot. Oh, it's annoying me now. Bought myself a spare one of them anyway, so I can keep it with the cutter to save nicking it out the other kit. And there's the actual cutter itself. So it's got removable and replaceable carbide insert teeth, 2 of. If I was going to make this again or order it again, I'd get 4 teeth put in it, so you get a bit less chatter. But it works pretty good. It's pretty perfect for what it is. But yeah, it's a sort of an advancement on the design after using it. If they could possibly add 2 more teeth in and keep the strength there that's needed, then I would definitely recommend it. If not, put 1 extra in and have 3 teeth. Just more the merrier, I think, on that one. But yeah, it's a lovely bit of engineering. It's flawless in the engineering side. The only fault that I can pick with it is the lettering's a bit. I don't know. It's just not perfect. Everything else is absolutely perfect, but the logo is a bit blurry. But that's about the only thing I could sort of pick fault in. So yeah, let's have a look at the cutter. Like I say, there's 2 carbide inserts. They're held in place with a steel wedge, I think it's steel. And then we've got a hex head screw in there, wedging that cutter in place, and that's the same on both sides. And then the actual limiter for the block is the profile of the block itself, so that's having a limiting effect on the cutter. I've also took the liberty of putting the 2 pinholes into the design, so that when you locate it onto the saw, so the saw would be here with this spindle shaft on the saw like this. Them 2 dowels, steel dowels or locating pins, engage into the 2 holes on that standard collet and stop it from rotating. So you don't need as much pressure when you're doing it up, 'cause it's only on a little M8 bolt. You don't need too much torque to actually fasten this. Those pins should take the force of any movement in the cutter. And the dowels there will fit the spacers, but I've designed it so that the side of that cutter, if you plunged in full depth, still won't cut into the rail itself. So there's a small recess on the edge of the block there of about 1 mil, and that's the equivalent of what that cutter sticks out along the side there. I don't know if you can pick that up on the camera. Let me see if I can do that. There, you've got a small little step there, equivalent to the setting on the cutter on the side there, so that if you plunged it full depth to that V, you wouldn't cut any more off of the edge of the guide rail. I'll use a FSK rail here to show you what I mean. So basically the step of this collet here, so that machined face there that the cutter sits against when it's on the saw, actually sits dead in line with that cut mark on the FSK rail, and that means having this cutter in won't affect that sort of 0 clearance strip there that stops all the tear out. So what I didn't want to happen is this new cutter to cut this deeper than the saw blades cut, and then it'd ruin that track for use with normal saw blades. Just a little side point about the 0 clearance cut insert there. On the Festool saws, you can sort of set them up to how you want them, so you can move them right out or right in. I've generally tended to favour having them set so that they're right in against the rail, so there's hardly any of that strip showing over the edge. And the reason I do that is if anyone else borrows your rail for whatever reason, then and they use a different saw on it, if somebody happened to pick it up and use their saw while you're working somewhere else on your rail, either by accident or just borrowing it without asking or something, then they're not going to cut your strip any deeper than your machine tools are set to. So that's the main reason why I do it. The other reason is it sort of sticks out less. If you catch that on the edge of a surface, or knock it or anything, it's more sturdy because it's glued closer to the edge than if you have sort of 3, 4, 5 mil of that strip sticking out. So I much prefer it that way. Originally I used to, when I put a new strip on here, because you can replace these, I used to set the saw parallel but right out, and then as it sort of worn down and got less accurate, you could move the saw in 1 mil using the adjustment and cut the strip again, and then it'd be clean. You could do that sort of 3 times and have a fresh cut on your strip each time, but now I don't tend to bother. I tend to just leave it on the right even setting. Back to the cutter anyway. It's a pretty simple bit of kit, but as you can see from the results, pretty effective, and certainly saves a lot of time in machining solid boarding to go in the backs of these cupboards, and it looks a lot better than having perfectly parallel strips in the back like the sheeting that you can buy. And another bonus is when you're doing sort of cupboards and cabinetry, that type of thing, you've got a solid back in the unit, so I can cut it dead square on the panel saw and domino it together, screw it, and it's a really solid unit. If you have a load of individual boards set along the back, there's no strength keeping the unit square. It's just a nightmare to line everything up if the timber starts moving or anything like that. It's just not as accurate and not as nice to work with. So it's really nice having a big flat square sheet to work with for the back of the cupboard. And like I've said earlier in the video, it's great if you're doing panelling on a staircase or something like that. You can fit the panel before you groove it and then just mark your vertical line and work from that. Okay, so I think I've waffled on enough now. That's it, custom cutter block done. Hope you found the video pretty useful. If you do end up copying it or using the idea and getting one made from whitetail, I'd love it if you could just pop a comment down below and say that you've used it and found it helpful, because I'm really only doing these videos to try and help people, so it'd be good to get some feedback on if it is actually of any use to anyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave that comment.